get on a plane and go to D.C. and get in line for the blue state and city bailout that the Biden administration is concocting.
Oh, really?
Well, they're going to need to because now that borrowing has become more expensive and uh, government backed investment instruments less attractive, some blue states and cities have some problems.
Bailout with what?
Well, there's one place where they got a printing press, and that's in D.C.
Yeah.
For example, Alyssa Finley has a write up on this in the Journal. That's pretty good. And when I provide the San Francisco example, think about the economics of the CTA or even Metra.
Mm.
Take San Francisco's 1.7-mile Central Subway, which opened in January at a cost of $1.95 billion, 3 times as much as initially estimated. Sounds like the Burn interchange.
Yeah.
The subway is drawing fewer than 3,000 daily riders, $2 billion. Fewer than 3,000 daily riders. The design doesn't make sense. Riders have to walk the equivalent of 3 football fields to connect to their other transit lines and take 3 escalators to reach platforms 12 stories underground. Genius.
Yeah.
However, that didn't stop Pelosi and other San Francisco socialists from championing the project. Because when borrowing is dirt cheap, why not max out the taxpayer credit card, which is what big blue cities have done.
But it's sort of reaching critical mass now on that with, the dollar being worth so much less
Yes.
now than it was just 3 years ago. And the fact that, in my opinion, this is a subject for another day, with the Chinese making a full-on assault on the, what do they call it, hegemony or dominance of the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. I mean, this is going on right now, and people don't get it.
Well, and we're helping them along by devaluing our currency.
Well, yeah. And I mean, there are predictions that this could happen like really soon.
Well,
I mean,
I'm not so sure about. I guess if really soon in like Chinese communists.
No,
think,
I'm talking
really soon in our think.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking that the dollar could not be the world's reserve currency very shortly. I mean, the price of gold right now is over $2,000 an ounce, it's happening. I think it's fast. I mean, it's not like a television program where we'll be right back after these announcements.
Yeah,
no,
not going to wrap up neatly in 30 minutes.
Yeah,
right.
But in a month, several months, by the end of the year, whoa! I mean,
well, I don't know about not being displaced as the reserve currency of the world, but I mean, again, I can see the sort of the larger point that we're a bit oblivious to the wounds we're inflicting on ourselves, and no place is more oblivious than Chicago.
We're indicting Trump when the Chinese are cutting a deal with the Brazilians, the largest country in South America, to use the yuan for trade as opposed to the dollar.
That's right.
It happened last couple of weeks ago.
That's right. Here in Chicago, just a reminder, not that we don't talk about unfunded pension liabilities enough, not that too many people seem particularly interested in it, but we'll talk about it anyway. Alyssa Finley reminds us 80% of property tax dollars in Chicago go to public sector pensions. 80% of property tax dollars. So you think your property taxes are funding CPS? Not that you're getting much of an ROI on that, even if they were, but 80% for essentially to prop up the Ponzi scheme that they've created with these defined benefit pension plans. And I mean, it's just, and remember, this is against the backdrop of Brandon Johnson and all the other Democrats, just about. Every answer they have, or every question about a particular public policy issue ends with investing in people, investing in this, investing in infrastructure, investing in this. It's all more government spend. Wherever you see a problem, they have more government spend as the answer. 80% of property tax dollars in Chicago go to pensions. Chicago's four pension systems only have enough assets to cover 25% of what they owe workers and retirees, which is, as we talked about earlier in the show, Brandon Johnson is Coleman Young. And maybe, as I said, maybe he's like late stage Coleman Young even as he starts. 25% of the state in Chicago's for pension, 25% is what they can cover. Less than Detroit's pension funds when the Motor City declared bankruptcy. Less, as I said earlier, Chicago is in a worse financial position than Detroit when it had to surrender to financial reality. Brandon, you better connect to all those money printers in D.C., huh? For more on all this and other topics. We're pleased to be joined by Don Boudreaux, American economist, author, professor, and co-director of the program on the American economy and globalization at the Mercatus Center. That's at George Mason University. Don, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Dan.
So the Fed is, trying to slay the inflation dragon as if they can single-handedly. Meanwhile, we've got backdoor Green New Deals and a pending bailout of pension funds that are in death spirals and transit systems that are unfinanceable as well.
Yeah, and major American cities are electing people who are totally detached from reality to the highest offices in cities. It's a bad situation we're in today. We have abandoned reality, it seems. But as Thomas Sowell points out, reality is not optional. It's going to come back to bite us, as you've been saying in these past few minutes, and it will. They're going to print more money, figuratively. It's going to cause even more inflation. You described it as an inflation dragon that they're trying to slay. Let's not forget, you know this, but let's not forget, that's a dragon that they created. That thing wouldn't exist were it not for the Fed and were it not for the encouragement that the Fed got from Congress and both administrations, both recent administrations, by all the deficit spending that's going on. And inflation, I think, is only going to get worse. In terms of the dollar as the global reserve currency, I'm not quite as fearful as Charles seems to be. It's like both countries, both governments are doing their best to make their currency, make their economies unattractive. And the question is, who's going to win this awful race? Will just because China wants to be and has these plans to be some global hegemon is not going to make it so. A country becomes economically globally dominant by being dynamic and open and innovative. The Chinese government's moving that economy in the opposite direction with all of its industrial policy and central planning. Unfortunately, our government seems to be doing the same thing. And so if the U.S. dollar does lose its status as the global reserve currency, it will be no one's fault but our own, because the Chinese government is not arranging for that economy to be dynamic and open and innovative. And so we can retain that status if we don't move as fast in that terrible direction as the Chinese government is moving the Chinese economy.
Well, right. I mean, China, because it's a communist country, I mean, it's centrally planned. It's never realized the strength of its numbers. And by the way, its numbers would be far greater had they not introduced the brutal, ghoulish one-child policy for 30 years that then has now been bumped up to the two-child policies. They've destroyed the capacity that they could have enjoyed by, destroying lives, literally.
One of my favorite economists that most people have never heard of is the late Julian Simon. And Julian Simon argued persuasively that the ultimate resource in a free society is the human mind. Because we get our wealth from innovation, and it creates new products, it creates new methods for producing products at a lower cost and more efficiently. And what the Chinese government did with this brutal, as you described it correctly, brutal and ghoulish policy of one child is denied itself many of the ultimate resources, denied itself the human mind, and this mistaken notion that people are purely a drain on the economy rather than contributors to the economy. And that's those demographics are now hurting the Chinese independently of the government's draconian authoritarian economic policies. But of course, those authoritarian policies are making things worse. President Xi, as he's called, is much closer to Mao than were any of the people between Mao and him. I'm not saying he's quite full on Mao yet, but he's certainly moving in that direction. And as he moves in that direction, the Chinese economy is going to move in that direction as well.
Yeah, so Joe Biden is moving in the Mao direction too.
Yeah,
Maybe not
yeah.
quite as fast, but
Yeah.
But I just go back domestically for a second here, because
Sure.
you wrote this interesting column about even as like the radical free market guy that you are, there are buttons you wouldn't push to just end things that the government does right now because too many people would be hurt. You have to sort of do things in you have to do
Unwind
things
them gradually.
yeah, and right in a process so that people can adjust to a new reality that's coming as incentives are realigned to be more beneficial to the actual American or person generally. So and you talk about the welfare state. That's sort of an obvious example because so many people now are essentially indentured servants to the government. They get all their sustenance from the government, so you can't just flip a switch
Right.
and eliminate that. Too many people would be hurt. So going back to what I was saying about potential blue state and city bailout, what do you say to the person that says, okay, I hear what you're saying, Dan, about the pension funds and the defined benefit plans. I hear what you're saying about the transportation, the unsustainable transportation infrastructure, these Taj Mahal transportation projects that you can't make where you can't make the numbers work. But what are you going to do? Because we're here right now, and you got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people relying on promises the government made with respect to their pension benefits. You've got hundreds of thousands of people that rely on public transportation to get from home to work, and they can't just pick up and move closer to work and so on and so forth. So what do? How do you not come in and try to prop up these systems? Wouldn't that hurt too many people too fast?
It's a difficult question because contractual obligations, and government is an agent that makes contractual obligations. They should be pretty sacrosanct in a free society. Of course, these contractual obligations were made in a political process that was largely corrupt and unfaithful to the principles of a free society. It's a difficult question. I certainly what should be done. This is the easy part. What should be done is no more. You stop making these sorts of commitments that have gotten us to where we are today. Here's a button I would press, Dan. I would prohibit the U.S. government, the national government, from issuing any more bailout funds to cities and states. Let them on their own. Yes, they have these obligations to pensioners. Okay, well, that's an obligation they made. And that means they might have to cut back on some other services. Cities and states do lots of wasteful things. I'm sure they have more than enough wasteful resources that they can divert from unnecessary programs to satisfy these obligations. The federal government should not be bailing them out. The more we do that, the more we aid and assist this. It's fraud. It's basically the more we aid and assist this fraud, the more it will go on, and it's going to get worse. It's like holding a tiger by the tail. You got to let it go at some point because the longer you hold, the angrier it's going to get, and the more dangerous it'll get when it finally breaks loose from your hold. So I would definitely press the button in getting the U.S. government out of this mess.
So, Professor, give us a projection on inflation over the next couple of years.
I'm not the kind of economist to give specific projections. I think economists who do that largely are just doing guesswork. I think it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse because the economy is becoming less dynamic. It's becoming less dynamic because of a lot of the policies that are being instituted, state, federal, and local. The money growth that was put into the economy over the past few years, it's still there. It's still working its way through the economy. That's going to push prices further up. The Fed is lamely, I think, too lamely trying to tackle inflation. It's reducing the rate of money growth. It's raising interest rates a bit. I don't think it's raising them enough. So I think inflation will continue. How much it will continue, I really don't know. Will it get to where it was when I was a young man in the late 1970s or early 1980s? I think it topped out 40 or so years ago at an annual rate of 13%. Will it get that high? I wouldn't be shocked if it gets that high. I'm not predicting that it will, but I do think it will be higher than it is today. And one thing I do hope, but I'm not optimistic about, is that the Fed will have the fortitude and backbone to wring the inflation from the economy in the same way that Paul Volcker wrung inflation from the economy in the early 1980s. Volcker, of course, had the support of the Reagan administration, largely. I doubt that Jerome Powell or whoever might be his successor, however long this takes, will have the support of whatever administration is in the White House. That's a very pessimistic prediction, but I think it's true.
Well, we just set such a terrible precedent during COVID, didn't we? When now to hear the COVIDians tell it, the federal government's action under both administrations saved the American economy. So so they shut down the American economy so they could print money and save it. So the the personal or the Paycheck Protection Program and those low interest or no interest loans that were forgiven, combined with all the checks that were sent. So we did it. And so, hey, what's another $1 trillion for infrastructure? What's another $1 trillion for green energy subsidies? What's another $1.5 trillion to bail out underfunded state pension systems? We can just keep doing this. This is what the modern monetary theorists actually believe, these ideologues. We can just keep doing this because look how well it's going.
Dan, it's even worse than Soviet Pravda. I think the people who published Pravda in the Soviet Union didn't believe their nonsense. This is American Pravda. I think the people who say this kind of stuff actually believe their nonsense. They believe they saved the American economy. They believe the economy is stronger today, or that it even exists today because of their brave actions in throwing money around that has no backing and productivity increases. They believe this stuff, and so you're right. They are convinced that if they can continue to do these things, no harm will come. The only consequences will be beneficial ones. But as I said, a few minutes ago, we are in an era of unreality. The people running the show, they are detached from reality, and they refuse to see the world straight on for what it is. And the press, as you know, largely doesn't help matters. They give credence to these wackadoodle claims as if these claims ought to be taken seriously, but they shouldn't. And until we get grounded again closer to reality, I'm pessimistic that we'll ever fully get there, but until we get grounded closer to reality, things are only going to get worse.
He is Don Boudreaux, American economist, author, professor, co-director of the program on the American economy and globalization at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. And you can always get his musings at Cafe Hayek as well, blog Cafe Hayek. Don Boudreaux, thanks as always. Appreciate it, Don.
Thank you.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. Your business and your money are in good hands with Signature Bank. I'm Dan Proft, and